Welcome to the Businesstalk podcast. I am your host Deepak from India. Today we have the privilege of welcoming Dr. Michael Brimm, Emeritus Professor of Organizational Behaviour at INSEAD, as our featured guest on the podcast. Dr. Brimm is widely recognized for his work in shaping strategies that strengthen performance at both the individual and organizational level. His recent work concentrates on leadership and large-scale transformation in multinational corporations, while his ongoing research ranging from organizational change to studying how leadership and innovation drive excellence in top-tier French restaurants. Over the years, he has played a pivotal role in designing innovative approaches that connect organizational change with executive development, including action learning and other cutting-edge pedagogical methods developed with companies and in consortia programs at INSEAD and University of Michigan. A highly decorated educator, he has received multiple teaching awards, among them INSEAD's Dominique Rio Award for his sustainable commitment to impactful program delivery, educational innovation, and mentoring across career stages. Originally from the United States, Professor Brimm earned his PhD from Harvard University and has spent most of the last 25 years in France, aside from 3 years helping to establish the Jerusalem Institute of Management as a founding faculty member. His academic career has included appointments in the University of Bordeaux, Northeastern University, and Harvard Business School, complementary by earlier executive experience as a divisional general manager at Shero Corporation. Today, he continues to advise a wide range of business and government organizations on complex, large-scale transformations and serves as a trusted coach to senior business leaders navigating demanding leadership challenges. In today's episode, Dr. Michael Brimm shares key insights from his research, from the kitchen to the boardroom, leadership and innovation lessons from French Haute Cuisine. It's my pleasure to now welcome Dr. Michael Brimm to the conversation. Dr. Michael, we are deeply honored by your presence and grateful for your time with us today.
Okay, thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'm delighted to be here, and of course, I'm delighted to talk about my favorite topic.
Thank you. Professor, you have termed chefs as a artist leaders. How does this unique leadership model in three-star French restaurants differ fundamentally from the traditional command and control leadership we see in most of the corporate environments?
Yes. Um, it's a very good question because I think it's important to start by saying my studies were largely in French three-star Michelin, the highest quality French restaurants. First, they're French restaurants, and France has its own tradition. And as I've moved around the world, certainly the way a meal is prepared in a French restaurant is actually quite different the way it's prepared in a fine Indian restaurant or even in Italy or other countries. So this comes out of a specific focus and the traditions of the French culture. But I think the issues that it raises are equally applicable whether we're talking about North American or Indian or any other parts of the world. So anyway, I'm pleased to have the chance to discuss this with you.
Professor, please go ahead.
Well, I guess the only other thing I would note that it's a French restaurant is a business enterprise like any other. The ones that I'm talking about are particularly high quality. They've been recognized by Michelin, which is the arbiter of which are the outstanding restaurants, and that's often a measure of the quality of cuisine, the level of innovation, and the level of service they provide to the people eating there. So it's a well sought after award, certainly within this restaurant community. And those who have received it get quite a bit of recognition. And in fact, some of those chefs are visible public figures and stars in the community.
Professor, fine dining kitchens operate with strict culinary standards and time constraints. How do these limitations actually foster the kind of innovation that corporate leaders often struggle to achieve despite greater resource and flexibility?
Okay. I guess the innovation is the key part, and the reason I refer to these people as artist leaders is because they are one leaders because they lead often a kitchen staff of between 30 and 50 people who combine to deliver a meal at any one point in time. And so it is a factory. It is like any other enterprise. But however, it is different in the fact that it is working in a field where one could talk about being an artist. And I think the notion of being an artist leader means something that is quite unique. While they certainly have the same financial and control issues that any other organization would have, they also have an aspiration which is substantially different. And I wonder, I'm not suggesting that if you're looking for a new CEO for your organization, you look at the local chefs in your community. But these are a particular group of people who are much closer to artists, and they combine that with incredible leadership skills, and I hope we'll have a chance to explore that today. But this notion of being an artist, if you talk to most artists, whether they be painters, musicians, of course they're concerned about income and well-being, but they're much more concerned about the quality of their performance. And that kind of concern drives out, and they will make decisions which sacrifice some levels of economic return or other things of that sort. So we're dealing with people who have a high level of commitment to their trade. And you see that with some leaders in the industrial sectors, but others seem to be much more of an economic driver, almost without content, and see themselves moving, if they're successful, from building computers to building automobiles to running consulting companies. These are people who see their artistry as that of the kitchen, and so they would confine their own ambitions really to that area.
Professor, restaurant chefs must deliver consistent excellence night after night with live feedback, like guest reactions. How can corporate leaders apply this real-time accountability and immediate feedback to improve the decision-making and performance?
Okay, let me step back a second, because to talk about a chef as a leader and as an artist leader, most artists have a much broader notion of what their organization is. An artist who's a painter relies on any number of organizations or small groups to provide colors, to provide materials. And a chef is no different. A chef relies upon suppliers and a number of people who can bring particular products of a particular quality, and they invest a lot of energy in maintaining those relationships. It's important to them to have a staff of people who share their vision and who can be counted on to deliver at the same level. And so that their involvement of what they would consider I don't think they'd call it, but their organization is slightly different. And so they include in that their clients, because every chef in the major restaurants that I've studied, they watch very carefully the plates that come back from the dining room, not only the ones that go out, but the ones that come back. And if there is half-eaten food on that, they will go immediately to the waiter and say, okay, what's the problem? And so they're getting information there. Their suppliers, people who provide vegetables and things of that sort, are a major source of new ideas. It's normal for the person who provides apples to say, I found a new kind of apple that we're growing. Here are a few of those. See what you might do with those. They have a slightly different taste. They're more bitter, whatever. So they have customers giving them input. They are getting their suppliers giving them input. And plus their own staff gives them input, because as they are trying, they will go to the chef and say, we are unable to make this on a timely basis because each dish is prepared when it's ordered. Obviously, there are some preparatory things. And so the chef, rather than in the old style, would say, you have to do it or we're getting somebody else. They have to consider it. So they're leaders of a huge organization, and they use those various elements quite skillfully and bring them together to operate within the kind of constraints that they need. In other words, they do need, when you've ordered your food, it has to come out and be there on time. Okay. I don't know if this is the right time to add it, but let me just give you an anecdote that shows how that comes together. Most chefs in these restaurants stand at a place called the pass, which is when the dishes are prepared, they're brought together on a tray, and it's at the pass where the waiter takes that tray to serve the 4 people sitting at a table and are waiting to be fed. I was sitting in a restaurant and in the kitchen with the chef, and something that most restaurant clients don't know is the chef would put his finger in and taste almost every sauce. Previously, the person who prepared that toast would have his finger in there tasting the sauce as well. Some use a spoon to make it better. Okay, so there's a continual quality testing going on. But I was standing there, and there was the tray brought out to serve 4 people their main dish. And he tasted one of those, and he said, we can't serve that. And the waiter looked and says, but we have 4 people waiting for their meal. And he says, we can't serve that dish. Find something else to send them to keep them happy. And we need to remake all 4 of those dishes. Now, it's an interesting, just think about this problem. There are 4 dishes made with expensive materials in a busy kitchen, having to remake these 4 dishes once again. And I said to the chef, how can you do that? He says, because that dish isn't right. I said, is there something spoiled in it? He said, no, it's not right. So after they had gotten through the thing, he said, here, taste it. I tasted it, and I thought it was spectacular. And he said, and I said to him, I said, do you think that the people at the table would have known that this dish was not prepared somehow in the way that you wanted? And he said, probably not. He said, but I know. And so there's just a rigidity there. It's not the old style command and control rigidity, but it's saying there is a standard that we have and we aren't going to compromise that. And so it's an example of what an artist would do. And I don't want to use the term in a bad fashion, but a number of businessmen would look at the economic cost of that decision and say, that's a wrong decision. It meant loss of expensive raw materials, a delay to the consumer. You had to send out something else to keep them happy while you were redoing this. But I think that captures the notion of an artist leader as well as others. And I think the staff in the restaurant have a respect for that. It both drives their own behavior, but it also drives their respect for their leadership.
Professor, French culinary tradition emphasizes apprenticeship and mentorship. How can this model inform executive development and succession planning in large corporations?
It's a great question. Let me talk a little bit, give you a background about restaurants. Chefs work quite alone. They work in their kitchen. They're there long days. They don't really have a lot of time to talk to other chefs. And so it's quite interesting what they do when they get together. And I've had the opportunity to sit and have dinner or have meetings with large numbers of these chefs sitting around a table. And they discuss a couple of things. One, they discuss the new dishes they've made. And there are no secrets. They are very proud of something they have created, and they're very proud to tell their fellow artists what they've done and how they've done it. And so that's it. But even more interesting for me as a business school professor, the other thing they talk about is their staff. And I just have seen time after time, one chef will say, remember Michael who worked as my sauce chef? Well, he's just opened his own restaurant. He left me and he's opened his own restaurant and he got his first Michelin star. And the other chefs would turn and say, good for you. Not good for him, good for you. And what it says is their respect as part of being an artist leader is the development of the next generation of leaders. And while there are human resource departments and there's training, this is a deep commitment of the chefs themselves for the development of people who work with them, not only for long-term, they want them to stay and perform after they've trained, but they also would like to see them succeed on their own as chefs. And that raises one of the big issues in the cooking profession, as well as my own university situation, which is business school the way to create a great leader? Great leaders somehow come from some experience, and if I can put in my own bias, one of the things that business schools do well is we bring in a set of people who have a limited work experience, and they have an opportunity to share that with other students, and there's a lot of learning done there, which may be more important than what we do in the classes. And so that notion of what they learn from one another really takes these people who have some work experience already and say, some of them have failed terribly and they need the business school to hide out for a while. Others have been very successful and are asking themselves the question, is that all there is? And so the business school is a context where a lot of them exchange and make lifelong friends and associations where they really explore those things. They don't need the statistics and the leadership theories and things like that. The good ones will learn that as they're working. But business school does provide a moment where they can step back, think about those things, and I guess have some frameworks to think about them. Anyway, that's a personal bias of mine. But I think it replicates what you see in the kitchens of these high-quality restaurants.
Professor, what parallels exist between a chef's menu strategy deciding what to serve, how to position it, and how to execute flawlessly in corporate strategic planning and implementation?
That's an interesting question because I think if you use the word strategy with most chefs, they will look around and saying, what are you talking about? They do think about continuous development, okay? And that development is not only in terms of their food. They look at, in their own strange way, at development as a leader. I'll give you a couple of examples. You have a kitchen where people are working hard to produce excellent food, which has often been designed by the chef, and then it goes out to serve. And so very quickly it can become, I'm producing food to get it approved by you, the chef. But that's not what a good chef is looking for. The approval has to come from the diner who's waiting at the table. So chefs do some interesting things. A number of them have now put televisions in the kitchen where they can see the restaurant and where they can see people walking into the restaurant. And the purpose, and so I said, what are you doing that for? The purpose of that is to keep reminding people that they're not working for the chef, they're working for the customer. And it's a very clever notion, and it's a challenge. How do you get people who are working in a large organization to recognize that they're working for a customer whom they never see and have no contact with? So some organizations quite skillfully get people rotated out for short times where they have a customer interface. But so it's that kind of leadership insight which the chefs, none of them do I don't know any who have been to business school, but they discover that or they see it from another person. And so it's a constant, they recognize that their challenge is, one, developing new and interesting dishes, but their context is also developing an organization that's able to do and implement on a, as you pointed out, on a very time-constrained and a difficult environment, and do that time after time. And they have to be able to do it with new dishes as well as old dishes. Okay. And maybe here's a point where I can add in. The other thing they do, which is fascinating to me, and I'm not sure what the direct application is for a person in a large enterprise. Chefs will take their most popular dish off the menu. And a very famous one at a restaurant, Behaviour, he had a famous dish that was made of red peppers, and it was quite a unique dish that no one else made. And people came from all over to have that dish. And he took it off the menu. So I said, well, why do you do that? You're disappointing the customers. He says, if you can only do one dish, you're not a chef, you're a cook. And other chefs say exactly the same thing. If you can only do one dish, and you're known for that, fine. But if it's one dish, you're a cook. And so the notion of a chef is someone who's continually innovating. And in this case that I mentioned, the reason he took it off the menu is, he says, because I get lazy. He said, it's a way of forcing me to innovate. So he finally has a happy ending. He got smart, and now everyone, the restaurant's now closed, but then for the following 3 or 4 years, everyone who came to the restaurant got a small portion of that as the beginning of their meal. So he bowed to that. But that notion is an important one. It's like any artist. You don't just do one painting. You want the next painting to be better, and you have to keep doing that. And if you fall back to only have pride in the one output, you're not going to be, quote, a painter. You're going to be someone else. You're not an artist.
Professor, in a restaurant kitchen, the brigade follows the chef's leadership implicitly. What specific practices create this level of trust and voluntary commitment that leaders in multinational organizations can adopt?
What would be an example of where that, for you, where that goes wrong? Because I'm not sure. What exactly could we draw from this? Are there some places where you've seen that go wrong, or you have people talk to you about? What might that be? Do you have a sense? For me, I guess I guess part of that is somehow lost in the sole focus on financial results. And I think a good chef, or at least those who are considered in amongst them as good chefs, one, they have obviously unique talent and skills in developing new and interesting dishes. But they also carry with them the notion of developing new and interesting talent. Okay? And then they have the notion of, trying to expand sort of the notion of cuisine. They're committed to that. They're trying. There was an interesting exchange when my work started getting some recognition. a couple of news agencies came into a restaurant. They wanted to do a reportage on that. And one of the cameramen turned to the chef. His name was Alan Sanderance in a 3-star Michelin restaurant, and said, Professor Brimm here said that you could make more money running a McDonald's restaurant than you can with this restaurant. So why aren't you doing that? And the chef looked at him and said, I don't understand the question. He said, well, you could make more money running a McDonald's. He said, of course I could, but why would I do that? And so the two of them were not talking to each other. And these people are in this, obviously, they look for some financial return, and they have to manage. What kills a number of restaurants is their failure to manage inventory and to manage costs and things of that sort. And so it's obviously an important issue touched there, but that's not why they're there. They obviously need to support themselves in what they're doing, but they're driven by their interest and their desire to make things that are unique and different and pleasing to a clientele. And so it's not, there are other things that come into play. The counterpoint to that, I'll just give you another anecdote. As a result, they make some odd mistakes. In a restaurant called Orchestrat, the chef had come up with a unique presentation. He had taken a fish which was almost inedible, and through a series of preparations had made it actually quite tasty. Okay, and it was just a plain white fish, but through freeze drying and then carrying a number of it became actually quite a tasty fish. And he said, I'm really proud of this. I want to put it on the menu. And the question is, who can tell the chef no? In his case, and in a lot of the French restaurants, oftentimes the dining room is run by a wife or a partner of the chef. And one of their roles is to be able to say, in this case, his wife said to him, what you've done is brilliant. I don't know how many people could have done that. However, when you see what the cost of preparing that dish is, we would have to be giving a person a plate with a small piece of fish in the middle, with no sauce on it, and charging him $100. And they would be outraged by that. And so the chefs do need someone that can sort of push them elegantly back, okay? And most of them have learned to develop that kind of a talent within the restaurant. Some do that with their partners. Their wives can often do that because they become family affairs. Others have a person who is responsible for the dining room who can come in and say, this is a brilliant dish, but our clientele doesn't seem to appreciate it, and somehow get the person to move on that. So it's the people, these chefs are really quite brilliant, like many artists, but they do need some counterpoint of someone who can tell them, hey, maybe you need to think about this one again. And so it's a very complex thing. When you think of how do you do that in a large organization, that's not obvious. It takes a sort of leadership which is really quite open to having these kind of discussions, or has some sort of a forum to allow people to do that. So you can have both the genius of a leader who is doing that, as well as the controls which make sense from the view of the client, from the view of costs, and from some other things like that. But at the end of the day, in many cases, the chef will say, I know it's not economic, but I'm really proud of this. And when it comes down to that, guess what? It's on the menu.
Professor, I'd like to conclude this episode with our last question. You studied how chefs personally embody excellence and set the standard for their teams. How critically important is the leader's own mastery and presence to driving organizational transformation and innovation?
It's It's a question I'm struggling with now myself. I am working with a series of groups that do trading of oil or metals or things of this sort. And the people who tend to be good leaders of those groups are people who are looked up as being outstanding traders. It's very hard to lead those traders if you're not seen as not only good, but slightly better than good, outstanding. It's the same dilemma that comes up in the pharmaceutical world. You have scientists who are working on new medications. You have a bunch of people who are trying to sell those medications. And, scientist comes up with a great find, and the marketing people say, yes, but there's only 2 people who have that disease, and they don't have any money, so why are we doing it? So in order to manage those kind of tensions, what most pharmaceutical companies have found is that the leader who is at that interface has to be a doctor himself or herself, which gives them credibility with both sides to some extent. And they can understand the distribution problems, and the other. But one of my favorite leadership stories of all time is in pharmaceuticals when a scientist in a famous, I think it's now known enough, in Merck, discovered a cure for river blindness, a disease which in South America blinded so many small children. And by mistake, one of their scientists discovered that something he was working on actually had the impact that it could solve with a single dose river blindness. And the marketing people said, it's a great cure, except those people live in villages and they have no money. So they went to the CEO, a man named Roy Vagelos, and they explained that. And so he said, okay, we have something brilliant here. We have to get the money. And so they went to the governments of those countries, and they said, well, these are poor people, and we're not going to invest a lot of money in them. So then the company went out to try and get funding, and they came in with funding, and they went back to the government and said, okay, we will give you the drugs. And the government said, except those people are living along the rivers in places which are very hard to get to. And to give him credit, the company said, okay, it's clear. And what they've done is they've taken people in their company and given them the opportunity to go into South America and to help with the distribution of the drugs. One, it solved a single dose of this cures this disease. It's incredible. But even more, it has fundamentally changed the mood and the commitment within the organization. And those people who have been allowed, they weren't paid specially for it, they were allowed to take time off from their job to go there and help distribute this. The total morale of the company was boosted. So I think it's what the kitchens do quite normally is really an opportunity for larger organizations not to do what the kitchens do because they are multi-located and stuff and they have problems. But it's a great opportunity for them to think about what would we do in our case. And that just happens to be an example and I think, again, it depends also on the fact that the chef does know and does have a standard where they have some stature. And certainly in trading, if you're working for someone who is not a great trader, it's not very motivating. So there is some of that same carryover that you're describing in the kitchens as well.
Thank you, Dr. Michael Brimm, for sharing such rich insights from the world of haute cuisine and leadership, and for joining us on the podcast today. We are truly appreciate and grateful for your time and commitment. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. It's very enjoyable talking to you about this. And of course, as you can hear, I'm very enthusiastic about it. Anyway, great meeting you. Take care. Bye.
Bye.